Okay, today we had kind of like animism as like a background for different world religions, and today we're going to get into what's called the Eastern religious traditions. It's kind of odd to talk about Eastern and Western religious traditions because technically, at least from where we're standing, they're all from the East. It's simply some are further east than the others. What we call the Western traditions can also be called the Abrahamic faiths, and those will be later on in the semester. But for right now, we're going to talk about the Eastern religious traditions, and these can include Hinduism, which is kind of like the primary. It's claimed to be one of the oldest organized religions in the world, if not the oldest. There are oral traditions of the Vedas that go back at least to 2300 BCE. If you're trying to compare that to like biblical literature, conservative scholars would place the book of Genesis or the books of Job at basically 1800 BCE. So Hinduism has about 500 years even on the books of the Bible. So we're talking about a very ancient tradition. Out of Hinduism, we'll start with Hinduism, and then we'll talk about some of the subgroups. Maybe we'll talk some about Jainism, and definitely we'll be discussing Buddhism. If it's helpful for you, I would say Buddhism is to Hinduism as Christianity is to Judaism. It comes out of this tradition, but it makes significant changes on the meaning of life, what you do to be enlightened, those sorts of things. So, very similar in their cosmology or worldview, but it goes from beyond there. And then we'll travel from India. These traditions come out of India, all three of these, the subcontinent of India, and then we'll go over to China, and we'll look at Confucianism, and specifically we'll be spending a lot of time on Taoism. But this is where we'll be going over the next several weeks. And what all of these different traditions have in common is what we would call pantheism. It comes from the Greek root pan, meaning all or world, and theism, which means God. So literally, it's all or the world equals God. Or you could simply say, all is God. God is all. God is. There's really nothing to say. It just is. And this will really help you as we begin to work on this worldview and these type of religious traditions. If you can remember, just keep this in your head at all times. All is one. Or more precisely, there is not two. Whichever is easier for you. No distinction, no separation, no division. Everything's one. One ultimate reality, or one totality of being. You might say, that sounds kind of silly, Blackburn. How can there only be one thing? Look at all the different beings or things we have in this very classroom. Well, from this perspective, we're not different things, but we're all connected. We are all part of the same thing. In the West, we focus on individuality and differences, what makes things unique. In the East, they're looking at holism, or how things fit together. So, in the West, we're looking at non-contradiction, how things are different, how one thing can't be two different things at the same time. In the East, they're looking at more of a comprehensive type of truth, an inclusive type of truth, as opposed to an exclusive type of truth. Does that sound like weird, or are you tracking with me? I'm going to give you a little Western philosophy before I take off on our journey to the East together, just because since all of you, I think, are coming from a Western mindset, it might help you to hear this explained from a Western perspective to kind of capture a bit of Eastern type thinking. And there's two philosophers who really highlighted this for me, well, three. One goes back to the 8th century, and his name's John Scotus Eriugena. He was actually a Catholic Irish monk, scholar, and he developed this type of dialectic. And he was working through like opposites. Like he could make a statement like, God is good, but he said it's equally true to say God is not good. And you might be thinking, no, Blackburn, that's heresy. God is good. But what he means is, when we're using human language and human understanding, God transcends human words for good and evil. So you would say, God is beyond good and evil. But the truth is the whole. God is good, God is not good, God is beyond good and evil. God is the Father of light, God is the Father of darkness, God is beyond light and darkness. God is great, God is not great, God is beyond greatness and not greatness. God is beyond all distinction, all dualism, all separation, all human description, because God is one. And this is the Shema in Deuteronomy. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And even though that's coming from a Western tradition, there were other Western philosophers who took that quite literally. Among them was Baruch Spinoza, the Jewish philosopher in the Enlightenment. And basically Spinoza took this to mean there was only one thing in the universe, and that one thing is God. And we can think about it in different ways like René Descartes did, through thought or extension. This is the great mind-matter distinction. And what happens in the West, we've had many people who are dualists, where they think, well, there's a realm of mind, like the soul, the spirit, and then there's the realm of matter, like our body or our flesh. And people have either gone like Berkeley and said, this is true, this is illusion, or they've been materialists and say, no, the physical universe is real, this is illusion, or people are caught in this limbo in between. And Spinoza is simply saying, these are two different ways of talking about the same thing, because there's only one thing. And let me give you one more example. And this comes in the 18th century, 19th century, by Hegel, the German philosopher following Kant, with his dialectic. And he says the problem in the West is we've been trapped in this Aristotelian either-or sort of mentality, the type of thinking that is non-contradictory type truth, where something is either A or it's not A. It can't be both A and not A at the same time. Okay, jibber-jabber. Let me break it down. He says basically, in the past what we've had is a thesis, where you make a truth claim or statement, and then you get an antithesis, which is challenging that truth claim. And what Hegel says, as long as you're trapped in this black and white sort of mentality, you're never going to see the whole picture. You're never going to see the true truth. You're only going to see a point of view. He says, if you want to see the real truth, you have to look for the synthesis between the thesis and the antithesis. So, for example, if the thesis, your truth statement is, it's black, the antithesis of that would be, it's white. But the synthesis between black and white is, it's gray. For example, if you go to a black and white movie, you could get into an argument with someone on whether you went to see a black or white movie, which would be an absurd argument. Because it's a black and white movie. It's not a black or white movie. But the reality is, you really went to see a black, white, and gray movie. Because most of the movie is actually in gray scale, with the exceptional black or white for contrast. That's the truth. And so once again, the truth, if you're not noticing a theme here yet, get the theme. The truth is the whole. The totality is the reality. And if you keep just pulling out little parts trying to find the truth, you're always going to come up short. So, all is one, the truth is the whole. And you can call it whatever you want. And in the East, they call it lots of different things. It can be called Brahman. It can be called Atman. It can be called the One. It can be called the Unnameable, the Tao, that which is beyond description. I mean, it can be lots of different, it doesn't matter because it just is. It's beyond names. It's beyond language. It's beyond words. It's beyond even manifestation, and yet from it all manifest things come, and all manifest things will return. One more example. I'm going to explain to you now how everything and nothing are actually the same thing. That should be worth the price of tuition alone. Right? Something you can share with your friends and family at Thanksgiving if there's a lull in the conversation. You can say, by the way, did you ever have it explained to you how everything and nothing is the same thing? If your thesis is everything, what's your antithesis? Oh, right. Nothing. And the synthesis between everything and nothing? Wow, very good. You guys have the hang of this. Something. That came to me one morning while I was having my morning constitution. That's when I have some of my best thoughts. And I'm sitting there contemplating, what is the synthesis between everything and nothing? And I was like, something. Something is not nothing, and it's short of everything. But what do I mean by everything and nothing are the same? Well, they're the same by definition, at least by George Friedrich Wilhelm Hegel's definition. And how he defined everything is that of which nothing can be added to or taken away from. This is Hegel. But it's quite ingenious because it's true. If you can add something to everything, it wasn't everything. And if you take something away from everything, it's not everything anymore. It's everything minus what you took away from it. So everything is that of which nothing can be added to or taken away from. But here's where it gets tricky. That's exactly how you define nothing. Because nothing is that of which nothing can be added to. Because if you added something to nothing, it wouldn't be nothing anymore. And if it truly is nothing, there's nothing you can take away from it. So by definition, everything equals nothing. And this will really help you when we start to get into Eastern philosophy, because some of the traditions, especially like in Buddhism, when they're talking about seeking nirvana, which can be translated like no burning mind, or they talk about nothingness or pure beingness, what they're really talking about when that kind of Buddhistic nothingness is everythingness. It's not how we think of nothing in the West, unless you're Hegel. Okay. So that really helped me a lot in kind of wrapping my mind around what they were talking about, because it seems so nonsensical from a Western tradition. But if you can get into this pantheistic mindset, all is one, or you could say all is God, then you'll be